All right, so hello viewers online, hello live audience here. Thanks for the introduction. I'm very happy to be here on my way to Amsterdam, actually, to give a training. I'm here to talk about front-end security. I'm gonna tell a bit of a story of what it's about, for me at least, and what I think is important to know if you're building front-end applications. I've heard there are some back-end developers here as well, don't worry. There's gonna be some stuff for you there as well. So let me start with an introduction. Let me start by telling you a story when I was young. Let me see if I can get this working. Okay, so when I was young, actually when I wanted to go online, I had to go to the library. I had to take my bike, go to the next city or town in my case, and there was a library with 2 computers and they had the internet. So you could go there in the weekend, you could go online, you could print stuff, take it back home, and then next weekend you can do it all over again. Some of you will probably remember something like this, others maybe not. Well, internet wasn't everywhere back in the day. But this, why I'm telling you this is because back then Yahoo looked like this. So today, I don't know if they exist anymore, borderline probably, but it looks a lot different than what it used to be. This was a web page with links. This is a browser. A browser back then, this is Netscape, from way before Firefox and things like that. Netscape actually looks a lot like the browser we have today. We already have an address bar, we already have tabs, things like that. So I'm going to talk about what has changed under the hood in the browser. Let me show you what the web was like back in the day. It was a server-centric web. You probably remember this, PHP, Perl, God knows what on the server. Essentially, everything interesting happens here on the server. You have a database, you have an application, you have things like that. Computers back then were kind of dumb. Essentially, you had a desktop with a wired connection, and it didn't do anything. The browser didn't do anything. It simply showed you a web page, and everything interesting happens on the server. Of course, attackers also focus on the server side in that case, things like SQL injection, command injection, those really old attacks, which unfortunately we still have today. Then things started to change very slowly. So this is 20 years ago, and counting, of course, and then things started to change. Browsers became a bit more interesting, but still web applications ran on the server side. Today, however, we have something what I call a client-centric. Today we have a web where everything or a lot happens on the browser. We have full-fledged applications running in the browser. We have Chromebooks, which is essentially a very tiny kernel. Then you have a browser, and then you can do anything you want on your laptop using that browser. Clients have changed as well. So we have laptops, mobile phones. So that's definitely one of the changes, which I will come back to later in the talk here. The server-side landscape, I'm not going to talk about that at all, but that has changed a lot as well. Instead of one server with one database, now you have containers, you have Kubernetes, you have whatever, virtualization, multiple databases, not even SQL databases anymore, just let your imagination run wild. Networks have changed a lot as well. On the server side, it's for now still wired, so that's let's call it a good thing. On the client side, you have things like Wi-Fi networks, you have mobile networks, and all of these have a big impact on applications, such as performance, for example. That's going to matter here. And what's even more strange, or what's a very significant evolution, is now we have peer-to-peer communication between browsers. Since a year or 2, 3, we have WebRTC, which allows my browser to connect directly to your browser. This means, let's talk about security for a bit, this means that attacks can now happen from browser to browser and not only from via a server. So when an attacker wants to send you malicious data, he used to go to a server and a server sends it back to you. Now we can send it directly to you. So that's going to change the threat landscape. That's going to impact the way we have to secure our application. Of course, attackers know this, and nowadays they focus on just about everything. They focus still on the server side. We still have SQL injection, unfortunately, but they also come up with a lot of new attacks and a lot of ways to exploit legitimate behavior one way or another. In this whole shift, security is not something that people often talk about. So in the introduction, was made clear that security is maybe front-end, maybe back-end, but a lot of people still consider security to be back-end. So it's a bit of a strange concept. And let me illustrate this with a question I took online from one of the certification exams that asks you about a JavaScript security check at the client. Is it a good alternative to a server-side security check? What do you think? Raise of hands. Should have bought a 360 camera so I can see the whole audience. Who agrees? Who says this is true? Oh, crap. The answer is true. That's a mistake in the slides. Do it like this. Yeah, there goes my question. So, yes, of course, the exam thinks that this is false. And it's not a good alternative. Who agrees with this?
Depends. It is not a good alternative. Volunteering.
Yeah. Yeah, so they say that it's a JavaScript security check is not a good alternative to a server-side security check.
Not only so.
Okay. And you said it depends. That surprises me. That's very good.
That's so often the answer to these kinds of questions.
Yeah.
Is PHP good? It depends.
Are you running it? No, exactly. So to me, it's not a true or false question. It depends. It depends on what we're talking about. It depends on the application we're talking about. Just to give you a very silly example, a very simple example, well, simple, very straightforward example. If you're doing a check for cross-site scripting, if you're building an Angular application, I would say it's a very good thing it's running in the browser and not on the server. Of course, if you're talking about a traditional application and you're doing authorization checks, sure, do them on the server and not on the client, or also on the client if you want. But that's already a very good feeling that you have here. So you realize that it's not that simple. Okay, let's zoom in a bit on what client-side security or front-end security may be about. Who here knows what the oldest security policy in the browser is?
I don't know. I'm gonna guess. Yeah, based on domain.
Yeah, same origin policy. Very good. SOP. Essentially, same origin policy is a security policy. It's 20 years old, so it's been in browsers that long. Everybody here knows it, probably when it gets in the way and doesn't let you do whatever you want to do. There's a very good reason for this. It's 20 years old. It goes back all the way until the introduction of JavaScript. And when they introduced JavaScript, fortunately, the people doing that, they thought about, hey, but if you have JavaScript and you can inspect DOM, what if you can reach into a frame of another page and start looking at the DOM or start modifying that? That's probably not something that we want. And that's why they have the same origin policy. And the same origin policy says that if you have two contexts and they have the same origin, then they can freely interact with each other. And if they have a different origin, then they cannot. And essentially, this is the most basic security policy within the browser. And every browser, well, for the sake of argument here, every browser has it. I know that Internet Explorer has like its own interpretation of an origin, but in essence, they have something which seems like the same origin policy, more or less. And every browser has this, and every browser must have this. And a very quick illustration of what this means is if you have a page with a frame, for example. I should probably hold this a bit closer. We'll see. If you have a page with a frame, and they both have the same origin, which consists of the scheme and the host here, and of course the port, but it's implicit, they can interact. They can reach into the frame. They can do whatever they want. If they have a data store, both frames have access to the same data store in the browser. Local storage, it's associated with an origin. This is where this policy becomes really important. You have a different example. These are different domains. So also the origin will be different. Even though it's a subdomain, they will not be able to interact with each other. And they will have access to a data store, but each will have their own data store. And they will not be able to access each other's data stores. That's essentially what the same origin policy is about. And the reason I'm telling you about this is because it's really important to understand what this policy does. It annoys you sometimes, but it also offers you very important security features. It started out as this, and now it also includes storage in the browser. A lot of countermeasures against specific attacks depend on the fact that certain behaviors are not possible in the browser. And there's a few other resources protected by the same origin policy as well. So you have the DOM, of course. You have local storage, in this case, local storage itself, but imec-DB is also associated with an origin, for example. You have permissions. So permissions for location or webcam access are associated with an origin. So any page within that origin will have access to these permissions and will be able to use them as they see fit. That's, for example, one of the reasons that isolating applications using paths doesn't work, because the browser works on the origin. So if you have two applications in the same origin, but in different paths, the browser considers them to be in the same security context. So if one gets compromised, the other one is probably compromised. All right. So far, we talked about the oldest security policy. What's the second oldest security policy in the browser? Guess. You might guess. This is not a quiz, by the way. Please come back.
Seeing all my questions. Secure versus not secure. Secure versus not secure.
Secure what?
Secure connection versus not secure connection. HTTPS versus.
TLS.
I wouldn't call that a security policy, but you're right. That's important. I'm not sure whether it's older or less old. That's only 4 years old, so probably not.
Content security policy.
No, only 5 years old.
XSL protection?
No, that's since Chrome came. Think about, you're looking too far. Think about cookies. You have security settings for cookies. They have been around, shockingly, for quite a long time, even though nobody uses them. They have been around for almost more than a decade. So, who here knows all the cookie security mechanisms? Yes. Are you using my book as a reference? Because that's outdated by now. Okay, go.
HTTP only and secure.
Yeah, HTTP only, secure.
Same origin.
You can use VAR.
That's not a security setting.
Is it a security setting that it limits itself to a string, or the you can only send a string and not, for example, a script?
Well, a script is a string.
Yeah, but it's not allowed to be interpreted as a script.
Unless the application does something very simple. But, yeah, I heard something saying what?
Same site.
Same site, yeah, that's 3. There's one more.
You can sign in.
Yeah, that's not cookie specific, that's
Expiration.
expiration. Well,
Yeah, you wouldn't want them to last forever.
yeah,
ever.
okay, that's true. But
Oh, and persistent or secure? I guess secure.
yeah, we had that. The 4th one are prefixes. So these two, like I said, they have been around for just about forever. Start using them, seriously. I'm not going to go into detail on these two. You should know what they are. If you don't, go online, look it up. It's normal. Same site attribute. That's a new one. That's been around for a year, I think, something like that. I'm going to talk a bit in detail about what that does. And then you have prefixes, which is, it's a mess. I'm going to try to explain what it means. The same site cookie attribute, essentially, what it does, it prevents a cookie from being sent across sites. So if a context from site A makes a request to site B, if the cookie is marked as same site, it will not be present on the request. Think about tracking cookies. They are always present on cross-site requests. So if you visit the Voorhoede website and they track you, well, they have tracking code from Google, for example, it will send a request to Google and it will attach the cookie there. And Google will know, oh, that was this guy, I saw him on that website last time. So they can track you. With this, they wouldn't be able to do that. Of course, Google is not going to set that cookie, that value on their cookies. But there's a second scenario here, cross-site request forgery. Again, no details on this. Essentially, the essence of the attack is that someone sends a request to an unsuspecting web server from a strange origin, and the server processes it as if it's a legitimate request, because the cookies are present. With the same site, you can tell the browser, don't do that. I'm the only one that will send requests to my backend. So whenever you see a request coming from God knows what shady website, don't attach cookies. Send it without cookies, and I'll ask the user to relog in if it's really important. And that's how this works. There are 2 modes of operation. One is the strict mode is the very secure mode. It will never be there. In lax mode, there are some requests that have the cookie for usability purposes. By the way, this is on the domain and not the origin. So it's called same site, not same origin, because it only works on registered domains. Because you often have applications running on subdomains, like accounting.example.com and users.example.com, and you want cookies when one makes a request to another. That's why it's on that. This is actually very good. So if you have an isolated application that doesn't require outside links, authenticated outside links coming in, apply this attribute. It's going to help stop CSRF attacks. Don't use this as the only defense, because there's a slight problem with the same type cookie attribute, and that's browser support. It's coming, but slowly. So Chrome supports this, and well, essentially all link-based browsers support this. The other ones will hopefully do so in the future. But if you already know that you don't need cross-site cookies, enable the flag and benefit from the protection in Chrome. By the way, if you have any questions, feel free to interrupt me. Or send a mail to Jasper or someone and he'll ask the question for you.
I have a question right now. With lack of support, is this a graceful degradation type thing? If I add it and the browser doesn't get it, no
Yes.
problem?
Yeah, browsers that don't know the flag will ignore it. So no problem there. Most security mechanisms today will actually be backwards compatible in that way. Because otherwise they start breaking things for older browsers and that's not a fun place to be. Yeah, exactly. All right, let's talk about the second one, prefixes. Who here knows cookie prefixes? Who has heard about them before? No? Okay, one. All right. Let me illustrate the problem before I talk about the solution. This is a set cookie header. This is whatever 101. This is how cookies are set in the browser. This is if you do it in a better way over HTTPS with a secure flag. That's with HTTP only. And this is for the entire example of .com domain. Again, no details on what this exactly means. What's the difference between these headers? The security settings, right? What does the server see when you send a cookie to the server? He sees this. Even though these are 4 different cookies, 4 distinct ways of setting a cookie, the server has no idea what's going on. So essentially, when you send this to a server, he has no idea, hey, is this a cookie I set securely with HTTP only enabled or not? So one of the attack here, one potential attack would be, for example, to override a secure cookie from an HTTP connection. So an attacker on a network, he can manipulate the network traffic, he can inject a set cookie header on an HTTP response, and some browsers override secure cookies even though they come from an HTTP connection. I know. Why? It's a browser. So other attacks are cookie jar overflows, for example, where the attacker starts storing a massive amount of cookies until the jar is full and the browser starts losing the older ones. And you can kick out one of the real cookies and replace it with one of the fake cookies. Another way would be from a subdomain. The attacker could use this domain attribute to set a cookie from a subdomain and start sending it to all other subdomains or domains within your application. And that could be a fake cookie. So this is a problem. A lot of information here, not a lot of information there. And that's exactly the problem that a prefix tries to solve. Bear with me, it's going to be a bit messy. This is the __ secure dash prefix. This thing, you can add this to the name of your cookie. So if your cookie was PHP session ID, now it's __ secure dash PHP session ID. What does it do? Well, essentially, by doing that, you will enable certain security policy in the browser. That's one thing. But the benefit is, it's in the name of the cookie, meaning that the browser will send that back to you as a server. So your server will see in the name of the cookie, hey, this cookie had the secure prefix enabled. And that means if it was enabled, so you have set cookie and cookie header. If the secure prefix was enabled, then the browser will ensure that the cookie is only set over an HTTPS connection. So cookies with __ secure dash whatever, they must be set over HTTPS. If it comes in over HTTP, the browser simply ignores it. Not valid.
Then why do you still have the secure attribute? That's backwards.
Yes, no, it's still there because this can only be set over HTTPS, but if the secure flag is not there, it will still be sent over HTTP. So the secure prefix mandates that this is set over HTTPS and that the secure flag is present. Those are the 2 requirements for the prefix to be valid. So if you try to set a secure cookie with this as a prefix and then some name, without a secure flag, the browser says no. Same thing if you do this over HTTP, the browser says no, not valid. Choose another name. Meaning, if you see this cookie as a server, you know that these restrictions have been enforced and you know that the cookie is secure.
Is that something servers have to know? Are there old servers running that don't know anything about that prefix? Like,
All
versions?
servers know nothing about the prefix.
No.
Yeah, it's a problem. Yes.
I'm still running Apache 2.2, so I mean, I wonder.
Yeah, but Apache doesn't care about cookies, I think, right? Okay. I do my lab sessions in Tomcat for my trainings, and I have to write my own session management to let people use this. Otherwise, there's no way to configure this yet. So hopefully soon there will be. But if you have control of the name, you can essentially start using this. There's a second prefix as well, the host prefix. The host prefix essentially enforces everything that the secure prefix does. And on top of that, it also ensures that the cookie will be sent to the host that set it, and only that host. So for example, if the attacker tries to set a cookie starting with this prefix from one of your hijacked subdomains, then the cookie will only be valid for that subdomain. It will never be sent to any of your other subdomains. So if you see this as a server, it means that, hey, this is a host cookie. So it means that I must have set it. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been sent to me. Or the user is using IE, whatever, 5 or something. Doesn't know that. So if the browser doesn't support this, of course, no restrictions apply because it's just a silly name for that browser and it doesn't enforce any security policies. Today, all browsers support this, so that's a good thing. I don't have a fancy graph of this because, again, I use website doesn't have cookie prefixes on it, but trust me, all browsers today support this. So, just for later reference, the slides are online on my Twitter account, by the way, so you can grab them there. This is what I just told you, so you can look it up later if you want to know more about that. Sorry, I think IE doesn't support it, but Edge does, so let's call it good enough. All right, questions about this? Yes?
Can you combine prefixes?
No. Because the host subsumes the secure prefix. So if you set the host, then secure must also be enforced. Because otherwise, yeah, where's the end? So they build on top of each other. So actually, maybe a word of practical advice, if you're running your application over HTTPS, you should, then all cookies essentially can be named __ secure. There's no reason not to do that. It doesn't break anything. So just do it if you can, if you have control of the name. If you're not running your application over HTTPS, we're going to need to talk after the presentation. Keep it in mind.
I was just wondering because actually really clear. Sorry, what you said it was going to be messy, so I'm kind of waiting for the messy part. It's still coming?
No, the messy. Sorry, I did too good of a job explaining this. The messy part is that we're setting security settings in the name of the cookie instead of using a proper flag, things like that. Yeah, I've done this explanation a few times, so I get better and better at it. But essentially, the first time I told this to people, they were like, "What? It's a name. You put it in a name." And, so yeah, it's a bit messy because you're starting to put things in a name just to make the browser echo this back to the server without browser modifications, and that, yeah, that's what I call a bit messy. It works. Also very messy because to support this in a JSession ID, for example, you need to change the name of the cookie, and that's probably not something that they will easily enable.
Maybe a stupid question, but how are these strings being read? I get spam supposedly from PayPal, and it supposedly has English text, but my fonts show that they look very Russian. The D's don't quite look right. They're using Greek letters that look like Latin letters. Does that have any, what are servers looking at when they see this string? Are they looking at just, oh, I assume it's whatever? Do they look at the Unicode code points, or?
I honestly have no idea. I haven't gone down that far.
We can fake like half those letters at least.
Yeah, but it shouldn't trick a server, right? Either string comparisons, I hope it doesn't trick a server. So no, it's not gonna work. It's a different string, and yeah, they compare strings. They don't visually compare them, so it's not.
No, but like comparing the length of pens using.
There's probably gonna be a server that messes it up, sure. But in general, I don't think it's an issue. It would be on my slides, for example. That would be a very neat trick.
And my servers are stupid. They think everything is just ASCII stuff.
Yeah, but if you start comparing strings, then it kind of needs to be, right? Otherwise, it won't match. But yeah, go look for some. Probably get some bug bounty for that if you find it. All right. So this was the introductory part. So the very old stuff, even though it's brand new, it's still cookies. One of the things about these policies is that essentially they're what we call server-driven browser-enforced policies. The same origin policy is something fundamental to the browser. It's there, it always works. But these cookie flags are something that your server can configure and the browser will enforce. So essentially, it's a cooperation between backend and frontend. Security is probably not only frontend, not only backend, it's going to be shared. So the backend will need to deliver these policies, like cookie settings, to the browser. The browser is going to enforce them, and together you're going to build extra security into your application. Like I said, cookie flags are a very, very simple example of these kind of policies. There's a lot more. There's plenty more of these policies available in browsers today that can actually help you build better and more secure applications. I have a few listed here. So you have things like HTTP strict transport security, which apparently Pohuda builds an extension for Lighthouse that detects the lack of these things, which is very, very good. Other examples are public key pinning, XSS protection, content type options, X-frame options, and content security policy, which somebody already mentioned during the question round up front. Who here knows what all of these do? And you guys built a Lighthouse team, right? Does it detect all of them?
Not the public key pinning, because most say that we can detect it, but most people say don't enforce it. Don't tell people you should use it because you're going to run into problems.
Yeah, I'm coming to that. Yes, so if I want to go through all of them, you're going to have to hire me for 2 days or something. So I'm not going to do that here. I'm going to talk about the first one. I'm going to talk about strict transport security in a bit more detail in the rest of this presentation. I have no idea how much, plenty of time left. So I'm going to do that. The other ones, well, they all have a certain effect on browser behavior. They configure the behavior of the browser. Let me give you a quick rundown of what they do. I'm going to skip public key pinning. We're going to talk about that in a bit. XSS protection, for example, is a header that allows you to control how the cross-site scripting filter in the browser should behave. So some browsers have a cross-site scripting filter, like Chrome, like Internet Explorer. And with this header, you can control it. You can turn it off if you want to. You can make it stricter if you want to. So it's a very simple header. It has 3 settings, and it simply tells the browser, hey, behave like this. Another interesting one is X-frame options. X-frame options, for example, allows you to tell the browser how you want your site to be framed. There are certain attacks that abuse your site if they can frame. So one example is a click-checking attack, where the attacker starts overlaying UI on top of your frame and tricks the user into clicking somewhere in the frame without the user realizing that he's doing it. With X-frame options, you can simply tell the browser, hey man, don't frame me. Even though if this website tries to do that, just tell them to bugger off and don't frame me, and simply give an error instead. So again, sorry?
Don't friendly, bro.
Yeah, that would be a very good name. Thank you. Essentially, again, if your application runs in an isolated way, if you don't expect to be framed, if you don't need to be framed, just turn it off. If you don't need it, prevent abuse through frame. You can also set it to same origin, so you can tell the browser framing is okay as long as I do it. Anybody else, don't allow it. This one isn't very interesting to talk about here. Content security policy is way too complex to talk about here. This is one of the most important security policies of the coming years. It controls the behavior of code or the behavior within a page. So essentially, it allows you to tell which resources are allowed to be loaded in a page. It disables things like inline style and inline script. It's a bad coding style. You shouldn't be doing it. It's also a potential, well, the presence of inline script is a potential sign of a cross-site scripting attack. So if an attacker injects script code, he's going to inject inline script, and your application will, or your browser will execute. So with content security policy, you can stop all of these things. Again, it's a very complicated policy. I have done a couple of talks about CSP in Angular, for example, at previous conferences, and they're online. So I'm not going to talk about that here. I'm going to talk about strict transport security next. Are there any questions you want to get off your chest now? No?
No, I was just relaxing.
Yeah. How is the gin tonic?
No, I didn't.
All right, so strict transport security. Honestly, I wanted to do a demo. I brought a special device to do a demo, but it works really, really slowly, so it's going to mess up everything. I think there's too much Wi-Fi in it. But let me explain what I wanted to do, and then fortunately I have a slide that shows the demo scenario, so we'll be able to deal with it. Who knows what this is? Nobody?
Seems like a router.
Yeah. Has a weird pineapple on it. It's called a Wi-Fi pineapple. It is kind of like a router. Essentially, it's called or sold as a penetration testing device. It's a hacker device. Essentially, this thing is a device that allows you to set up a wireless connection and carry out various types of attacks in a very easy way. Of course, you can do them in more complex ways, but this thing is kind of a plug-and-play way. You install some modules and you launch attacks from there. This thing has two modes of operation. You have a nice mode, where you simply set up a wireless network and wait until somebody connects to it, or trick them into connecting to it by calling it the voorgoede, for example. The second mode of operation is a bit nastier. You can set it up in karma mode when it starts, and that makes it start listening to devices looking for wireless networks. So if you come by train and you stop at Starbucks and you go on Starbucks Wi-Fi, then chances are that your phone is now looking for the Starbucks network. It's like, hey, Starbucks, are you here? Are you here? I want Wi-Fi. And this device will be like, ooh, Starbucks. Yes, that's me. Connect to me. So your phone connects to the device automatically. You see, ooh, I have Wi-Fi. Happy me. And you go online. And at that moment, you're sending all the traffic through this device, like a router. But the main difference is that this is intended to be malicious, while the router is probably not intending to be, but still vulnerable to all kinds of attacks. But that's, again, a different story. And with these things, you can do all kinds of nasty things. You can intercept traffic. You can modify traffic, which is why you should be using what?
Yes.
HTTPS. Very good. Very good. But even then, things can go wrong. So in my demo, I was first going to show you a website, a web shop I also use for building supplies, and they use HTTP for browsing the catalog, because who cares, right? Then, when you log in, they switch to HTTPS, because login is sensitive, it's secure. But if the device is in the middle, it's going to be able to modify the HTTP pages, because it has full access to that traffic. So what it's going to do is an attack called SSL stripping. And an SSL stripping attack, it's simply going to rewrite all the links from HTTPS to HTTP. And it's going to trick your browser into keep using HTTP, because it never sees HTTPS. Which is why you should use HTTPS for your whole application. Not only the important parts, everything from step 1 should be HTTPS. Are we secure if you do that?
Never fully secure.
You're too cynical. Come on.
Are you safe when you put on your seatbelt in the car? Never fully.
Everybody else.
It depends.
It depends, yeah. It's a very hard audience. Come on, more liquor.
Absolutely not.
Not.
Absolutely not. Yeah, well, whatever. No. So there's a problem. Even when you use HTTPS for your entire application, there is one moment that your application is vulnerable, and it's going to be vulnerable to man-in-the-middle attacks, even on HTTPS. Let me show you instead of demoing it. I do a demo with the Belgian tech services. They use HTTPS for everything, which is awesome, but they forgot one step, which makes them vulnerable. Let me show you here what happens instead. So if a user goes to a website, like Facebook, whatever, you don't type HTTPS ://www.facebook.com. No, you type facebook.com and the browser does the rest. What the browser does under the hood, so laser pointers don't work on TVs, so if you type in this, the browser doesn't know what that means. It's not a URL, it's a word. So browsers, helpful as they are, they're like, well, let's see if it works. Let's make a get out of this with HTTP and see what happens. If it doesn't, we'll deal with it in some other way, but let's send a request first. Remember, this guy is in the middle, so he sees everything possible. You see where this is going, right? This is an HTTP. The attacker intercepts it, forwards it. The server says, whoa, HTTP, that is not okay. I want to use HTTPS, please. So he sends a redirect to HTTPS. The attacker intercepts it and simply fetches the page. He follows the redirect, he sets up a secure connection, and he fetches the page over HTTPS. Then he rewrites the entire page, changing HTTPS everywhere to HTTP. Then he forwards that to the browser. So your browser connected to my device, it fetched an HTTPS page, rewrote it, and served it back to you. Your browser is very happy. He sent a request, and he got a response. He's like, okay, I'm done here. Check. And he waits until you do the next thing, which of course, when you log in, when you send the username and the password, it's over HTTP. The attacker is still in the middle. He forwards it over HTTPS, of course, otherwise the server would complain. And he again rewrites a response. So essentially, he has a full man in the middle position, even though the application is using HTTPS. Because the browser did a silly thing, used HTTP. Is that clear? My apologies for the lack of an interactive demo. So this is a problem. So we've been telling people use HTTPS for everything for years, and they have been, and now they're still vulnerable to this kind of thing. And a lot of people are actually vulnerable to this. Who here has an application running over HTTPS? Very, very good. I'm not going to shame you if you have. Who here is vulnerable to this?
Everyone.
All right, pay attention. What is the solution?
Have browsers try HTTPS first, wait for the server to say, I don't understand that, then call back to HTTP.
Okay, that would be, that's very good. I get that remark a lot. Let's say that the browser does that. How does it know that the server doesn't support HTTPS?
What do I do when I type it? I get a, this page doesn't exist.
Okay,
That's what I think.
how hard is it for the attacker to fake that?
Oh, it's easy.
Easy. He's on the networks. The only thing he needs to do is like send a TCP reset because that port isn't open. And boom, the browser is gonna try HTTP next, and he still has the upgrade channel. So it's not gonna work. And by the way, it's with certificates and it's a mess. It would be a good way, but because of the web works, it's not gonna work. The other solution. Yes, HSTS, strict transport security. That's what we're talking about here. Strict transport security is a security policy you can configure on the server. It's going to tell the browser, hey man, behave more securely, please. It works like this. So you have a server in the browser. Essentially, you tell the browser, strict transport security, that's the name of the header, and you tell it max age, and then some very long, very big integer. This is about a year in seconds. So you tell the browser, in the next year, if you want to come to my website, use HTTPS. I don't care what you think you should use HTTPS. So whenever user does this, it's for website.de. You go to website.de, the browser will do HTTPS from step one. Because this browser now knows that you want this. You as a server have told the browser, do this, please. There's a second flag here, include subdomains, which means that if the user goes to a subdomain of your application, the browser is going to look at its settings. Oh, I have this HTTPS setting on strict transport security, so I'm going to make that call over HTTPS. Of course.
These don't solve that problem, though.
What problem?
It's HTTPS. First request.
The man in the middle.
What's the difference in the browser thinking that it needs to prepend with HTTPS and me typing it in that way, or having the browser by itself automatically prepend with HTTPS if that first request is still one-sided?
Told the browser that you support HTTPS.
So once it's enabled, this thing solves the problem we had before.
But first it has to get the confirmation that
Yes. Once enabled, problem is solved, right? But there is indeed still a problem to enable this the very first time. If you haven't been here the first time, you're still in trouble. Yes, absolutely.
Or after a year.
Or after a year, yes. But since this is not absolute value in the sense that if the user comes back after a month and you send the same header, it prolongs again for a year. So very good remark. The max age should at least be spanned 2 subsequent visits of the user. If you're the text service, for example, you should make it longer than a year because people, well, honestly, I don't go to the text service unless I have to, or when I'm giving a demo. That's not my main browser, which I use for that. So, span 2 visits. If you're Facebook, you probably can get away with 10 minutes or something. Why not use a year? You're using HTTPS anyway, so it doesn't matter. Set it longer. By the way, if you set it to 0, you can disable the policy. So if you screw something up, you can set it to 0 again, and the browser forgets the policy. But we're talking about this very first request. And to be honest, there's no good solution for that. I'm going to talk about that in 2 slides. Let me show you a few, well, I essentially covered this. Let me go over this very quickly. So this is a very basic version of the header, no include subdomains, and you can add that flag to have more. So essentially, this configuration is very easy to add in your Apache 2, whatever. Simply add this one-liner and you're done. It's that simple. It's a static policy, so there's no need for dynamic configuration whatsoever. The solution for the first request, well, essentially it's a trust on first use problem, and there is no good solution. There's no way to address this, so the best we have at the moment is a list, a preload list. The preload list is just like it sounds. It's a hard-coded list of websites in your browser that have registered themselves to support HTTPS everywhere. So essentially, it started out with Chrome, I think, and now every browser follows this. So essentially, if you register yourself from then on, every time the browser goes to your website, even if it's the very first time the user goes there, the browser will see, oh, but you're on the list of HSTS preload, so I'm going to use HTTPS. Even if the user types HTTP, I'm not going to care. I'm going to upgrade it to HTTPS.
So all I have to do is when people go to download their browser, change that list and add my evil Mallory site.
But if you want to add your site, you can simply go here and fill out a form. And you can add yourself. It's not a problem. There are some attacks. Essentially, you can. I'm going to talk about that in a second. If you want to be put on the list, you can check whether you're eligible, because there are some preconditions before you can be on the list, because they don't want to add just about everybody. First of all, you need to add include subdomains, because they don't want you to start adding every subdomain individually, so you can only be on the list if you do it for all your subdomains, which may be easy if you have an application and no subdomains. That's very nice. If you are a big organization and you have 25 departments, and each department has 25 subdomains, if you enable this on a top domain, a lot of stuff is going to break, because a lot of people still have HTTP stuff running God knows where that they forgot about. But once you turn it on, the browser will no longer make an HTTP connection. At that moment, things start to break. So if you're in that situation, you should work towards the top and start with the subdomains. Simply enable HSTS without preloading, and whenever every HSTS is enabled everywhere, then you can enable include subdomains on your top domain and then start preloading it. You can do it with a header like this. Notice the additional preload flag here. That is to stop evil attackers like her from adding just about any website to the list, because this list is going to check if you explicitly added preload to your header, meaning that if you're the administrator and you type preload in the header, you should know what you're doing, and you should agree to be put on the list. What is one of the problems that we see with this? People are enabling this, which is very good, but they got it from somewhere else and not from my talk, because people are copy-pasting configurations from blogs, and the configurations often include a preload flag, even though they don't want to be preloaded. But since it's there, somebody else can add them to the list, because the list is going to think, well, preload is there anyway, so let's add it. And then you get complaints like, oh, take me off the list, help. You can imagine this is a hard-coded list, so the cycle to update the list is quite slow. So it's essentially when you update your browser, you get a new list. So it's 6 to 8 weeks you're left. So be careful if you add a preload and make sure you really want that there. Any questions about this?
If you want to be preloaded, I didn't know that you still need to enter it somewhere manually. Browsers will pick that.
No, you have to register explicitly on hstspreload.appspot.com. Otherwise, you're not going to end up on the list. Yeah.
It's like a little bit more work than this, because like this feels like you could just add any website you want to break and then it will be added to the list.
You have to set the header.
Yeah, as long as the website sends this header, sure, you can do it. But essentially, once they add the header, they are aware, should be aware of what it means and what you're doing. It's not always the case, but they should be. Yeah.
Who's the organization behind SKS?
That's Google, I think.
Okay.
But I'm not sure. I believe it's quite shared since all browsers are using it. So it's probably even a public list. I honestly haven't looked at it that closely, so I don't know.
I have another reason to add the header, which is the round trip you saw on the first one. You will save that by turning on the headers.
Awesome. Okay, sorry. Let me rephrase my story. Security, but if you want to make your application really fast, you should enable HSTS. It's going to save you the redirect, and it's going to use HTTPS from step 1. You can even use HTTP2 then. Awesome. Do it.
Because what do users want? Fast or secure? They want it fast.
Yes. Thank you. A very good point. I'll have to steal that and add that to my
only
slides.
reason why I
It also helps a bit for security.
Yeah,
but
sure.
It's good that you have it anyway. So now make it even faster on the first request and add your site to the list. That's super performance. Anybody else? All right. So essentially, one of the messages I want to deliver here, by giving you one example of such a browser security policy, is that browsers nowadays, they pack a lot of security tools. So browsers have a lot of security policies. They follow these things quite closely. They try to their best to implement new versions of these security mechanisms when they come out. So it's up to you to start using them and start leveraging the browser to actually build more security. You'll see that there's one guy like sitting in the corner, a bit sad. In all honesty, Microsoft is pushing quite hard with Edge, but well, IE has its limitations, and some of the security things are simply not available or not enabled in IE. So keep that in mind, but it will improve in the future. As far as I know, with the most important policies, Edge is following the other normal browsers, not the super fast like Chrome and Firefox, but these three are essentially aligned in things like CSP deployment and stuff like that. All right. If you want to know more, you can of course use the Lighthouse extension. There's also a website that does something similar. They probably stole it from your extension, but there's there's a site called securityheaders.io where you can scan your website to see how good you're doing with all of these headers. Essentially, when you do it, it gives you like a score. People like very condensed reports, like A+. Yes, I'm doing good. And it gives you a check like which headers you have implemented and which ones you haven't. These tools are absolutely awesome to raise awareness. These tools create a lot of awareness, especially if I scan your website and you have an F, I can start shaming you and you're going to have an incentive to improve your security score. But you should be a bit careful. There are two pitfalls here. First of all, don't game the system. This is from a banking website. And actually, well, the banks in Belgium, somebody ran the SSL server test against their websites a year ago or 2 years ago. And the scores weren't very great, and it made the newspapers and whatever. You know how reports work. So now with this website, the banks were like, oh crap, another score. We have to improve that quickly because otherwise we're going to have another news article about how crappy our security is. So they tried to game the system by adding all kinds of useless headers to get to a B. So for example, they enable XXS protection, which is, okay, let's give them some credit. That's a good step. Then the other ones, they simply, the CSP header repeats that. They have strict transport security, that's good. Then X-frame options is same origin, which is acceptable, but it could be a bit tighter. But essentially, they start adding things like essentially a fake CSP header to get to the B anyway, so they can game the system. And the second thing is to always be a bit careful if you look at the scores and try to see what's happening there. And the second thing has already been mentioned by your colleague about public key pinning. So this website advocates the use of public key pinning because it's a security header and you should have that. Let me tell you what it does. It helps you stop an attacker even if from getting a man in the middle on your HTTPS connection, even if they have a valid certificate for your domain. So if I can trick a CA into giving me a certificate for your application, I would be able to intercept HTTPS traffic using that. But with public key pinning, you can stop that attack from happening, which is really, really, really powerful. Gives you a lot of security. But also, when something goes wrong, you're essentially kind of screwed. This is exactly what happened. Well, at first, people were like, yeah, PKP, awesome, public key pinning, everybody should do that. And then they started to see what it meant in practice, because it means that if you screw it up, if you all of a sudden use a key that hasn't been pinned before, the browser will refuse to connect to your application. The browser says, whoa, you told me I should only use these and these keys, but now you're using whatever third key. I have never seen it as a legitimate key. I'm not going to use it because it looks fishy. It might be an attacker, even though it's not. And that's essentially what happened to Smashing Magazine. They had public key pinning enabled, and I think in the end of last year, they rotated their keys and they screwed it up. Essentially, the whole site was unreachable for 4 days because every browser said, well, with all due respect, that's an invalid pin. I'm not going to connect to that because this is not a key that you consider to be trusted. And essentially, that's when the whole thing started turning around. People are also seeing abuse with public key pinning. For example, somebody breaks into your server, they enable pinning on all your users, and then they take their private key and they ask you for money. Otherwise, you don't get the key. That's kind of painful as well. And the reason this is so painful is there's no way to turn it off. You can only turn it off over a valid HTTPS connection. The browser cannot make a valid HTTPS connection because public key pinning is in the way. And that's why today the advice is you should stay away from public key pinning. Probably not the most secure policy. You're probably not the one that needs it anyway. So this might be something you shouldn't do.
I think also because the security headers.io is Scott Helms' work. I think he's even considering removing
Yes.
something like
Yeah, he wrote a blog post about it 2 weeks ago or a week ago. But as of now, it's still recommended on the website. So.
Is it not that you can still get an A+ without the public key pinning?
I haven't checked. I would have to check. I don't scan these sites every day. Maybe. Last time I checked was a month ago, and then it was still in the recommendations of to enable. But this is, well, the main challenge or the main problem here is that your update channel for the pins is the same as the channel you're trying to protect. Public key pinning works very well in mobile applications, for example. Because in a mobile application, you can pin your key in your code. You can say, I only want to use these keys. But if you need to update your application, you go to the App Store. That's a different update channel. So you don't depend on the validity of your keys to update the pins. So even in a disaster scenario, you can still fix it there, not in the browser. They fixed this because they found their private key they used before in a backup somewhere, and they used that to get a new certificate from the CA, which was again valid. And because the key was still pinned, they could tell the browsers of the users to turn it off, and that's how they saved their website essentially. Otherwise, well, the consequences would have.
They had this with cars for a while. They started putting the little chips in the fobs, and initially some car manufacturers thought, let's make it completely unique. And then somebody locks their key in the car, and then the car manufacturer can't reproduce the unique pin, can't unlock the car. They have to break the lock and replace the door. And that's why they stopped doing that. And now the manufacturer can always give you a key for 200 some euros that unlocks your car.
Okay, look at that.
That's your app store, the car manufacturer.
Yeah. Well, you can always break the window, right? If you have a good insurance, it's covered anyway. So.
It's always raining the day you
I
have
don't know
to
what
do
happened.
that.
My window was broken, but yeah. Shit happens. But yeah.
If you know what you're doing, you have a backup of your private key, why shouldn't you use this?
Very good question. What applications are you building?
Just web app that is quite, it has a lot of private user data.
Yeah, there's a difference between private data and insanely sensitive data, in my opinion. Okay, let me pose this differently. Attacks against this are very rare, in the sense that if somebody gets a fake certificate, they attack companies like Google. Why? Because governments in the Middle East, they like to read email of their citizens, because enforcement, whatever. And essentially, the DistriNet breach from a couple of years ago in your very own country, I'm proud of that. Essentially, they discovered that because Chrome was already doing key-pinning in code of the Gmail services, well, of Google services. And it signals an invalid certificate on Gmail. And Chrome support team was like, yeah, that's strange, send us a screenshot. And it said like signed by DistriNet for start@google.com. That's how they discovered that, because Chrome was like, well, the people at Chrome were like, oh, that's a bit fishy. And they went to investigate that, and that's how they discovered that the CA was hacked. So these companies are a target. If you're running financial transactions for half the world, you're probably a target. But if you have user data, in all honesty, you are a target against a lot of other attacks, but people getting a valid certificate to man-in-the-middle connections is probably not high on the list of things to consider. Given that, even if the risk is really high. You can try to do it if you want to, but it's still available in browser, it still works, but the risk of a screw-up is, in my opinion, over. All right.
The risk of a screw-up is high.
Yeah. especially if you walk backwards.
Yeah.
So the risk of screwing up is a lot higher than the benefits you get from enabling this.
What about the banking websites?
Yeah. It's hard. Well, if you're gonna start looking for the line, I can't tell you where it is. Yeah, it's a hard one to do. I would say probably not, but maybe. It's not a line I can define.
Even if you have it, you will still be vulnerable, obviously.
Sorry?
Even if you have all these measures enabled, you will still be vulnerable.
Against other types of attacks, yes. Sure. For example, banking websites, what are the attacks we see today? Probably not someone getting a fake certificate. They simply trick the user into installing malware. It's much easier.
Denial of service.
Yeah. Yeah, true. So, the best advice I can give you here is fix everything else first, and then look at public keeping. Make sure that you don't have cross-site scripting, you don't have SQL injection, you don't have all the other problems that web applications face, and then you have my permission to look at public keeping.
Okay.
But focus on other things first. They're a lot more important than public keeping. This is one attack, a very hard attack, a very exotic attack, which is very likely to be quickly detected, especially with new things like certificate transparency and stuff like that. So focus on everything else first, then address these things.
This is possible to get malware on your computer that creates a root certificate, creates a certificate for every website that you visit.
Yep, absolutely. And public key pinning doesn't stop that. Local certificates, local root CAs on your machine take preference over public key pinning. We had that 3 years ago, Superfish. Remember?
Yeah.
You bought a Lenovo laptop, you got this nice adware that tried to give you targeted advertisements. And to do that, they scanned your network traffic, your browsing traffic. But of course, HTTPS kind of got in the way, so they installed their own root CA in a very insecure way. And they man in the middle of every HTTPS connection so they could scan what you were doing online, so they could give you advertisements. And even though if you had public key pinning enabled, it doesn't stop that. Because companies use the same technique to offer corporate firewalls to make sure that you don't leak information and don't download malware and stuff like that. And they need to be able to override pinning, even if the site doesn't want to. Yes. So we have plenty of time in the break to discuss this further and during the quiz as well. I hope I didn't give too much away. Otherwise, you have 15 minutes to make new questions. You're good. One of the things you should remember is that a lot of these things, a lot of these behaviors that lead to attacks come from the legacy of the web. Because some time ago, they decided, let's make cookies for domains and not for origins. And now we suffer the consequences with things like cross-site request forgery and stuff like that. Also, fixing things now will break a lot of websites. Browsers don't want to do that. Because if you're using Chrome, and tomorrow they say, let's make it ultra secure, and 5 of your favorite websites break, what are you going to do? Sit back and like, yeah, but Chrome is really secure, I'm going to accept it. No, it's like, God damn it, download Firefox. Then tomorrow you're using a different browser. And that is very expensive if you're building browsers, so they don't want it. Second part is learn how to use these numerous security features. You have a lot of security features in the browser available today. But as you have seen here today, you know maybe a few of them. You know the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot more. That brings me very nicely to the introduction of who I am and what I do. I give trainings on web security. I give training about these new things. I don't normally talk about things like SQL injection because, in all honesty, if you haven't heard about that before, you should start reading interesting books and maybe look for something else to do. CSS is probably nice. No, so I mainly focus on these new technologies. I mainly focus on things like these security policies. What do they mean? How do they build on the same origin policy? Why should you be enabling these as soon as possible? What does it buy? And that's essentially, in a nutshell, of my daily activity. So I'm on my way to Amsterdam for a training. I asked these guys if they wanted a presentation, since I'm here anyway. They said, yeah, let's do it in Rotterdam. Yeah. Fine. It's kind of on the way, so that's okay for me. It's very nice. I haven't been here before, by the way, and it looks very nice. So, yeah, that's clear. Thank you. Maybe a very last thing that might be interesting. Well, second to last thing. I also co-organize a yearly security course for developers, SecOpDev, which is a week-long course in Leuven in Belgium. We have a very good beer like Jupiler and a few thousand more. So that's a side note. But no, seriously, this course is it's really interesting. It's a week-long course, 2 tracks with every module on security. It's taught by experts from around the world, both from industry and from academia. We have, for example, next year we have the guy responsible for security in .NET from Microsoft is coming to teach a few sessions. We have somebody from identity server, identity management server essentially, the guy that built that is coming to teach about how to do access control, how to do identity. So it's really interesting. All the info is on the website, so definitely check it out there. If you want to follow a specific web security course, I'm having one in Leuven as well in November, so feel free to look it up and join us there. It's going to focus on a lot of these things that I mentioned today. So we have HTTPS in a lot more depth, strong authentication, making passwords more secure, using multi-factor authentication with YubiKeys, and things like that. So again, look it up if you want to. Definitely recommend it, not well, also by me, but also by people that followed it previously. And this is my last slide, I promise, and then you can start.
I was applauding for your Rotterdam comment.
I know. It was a joke. Thanks for killing that as well. So, my send away message. First of all, I teach people how to build secure applications. I don't build, well, I build applications, but very small ones. So you're guys that build applications for thousands or millions of people. So please, take security seriously. Build security into your applications. Follow people. Follow me on Twitter. That's a good start. But also follow other security people. There's a lot of information out there. So make sure that you have some people in your newsfeed that you can pick up on some security things every now and then. And it's going to make you better at what you do. And the final thing is maybe the most important thing. When you do something on security, share the message. When you build something like the Lighthouse thingy, share that on a meetup, which you probably have done in the past. If you secure your application, I'm not focusing on it. If you do something in your application to enable HSTS, to enable CSP, talk about it. A 10-minute talk to others about, hey, this is what we did, and this is how it increased our performance. It's going to convince other people to think about it. It's going to spark something. And this is how, essentially, we can work all together towards better and more secure. And that's what I have here today. So thanks for listening. I hope you know enough for the quiz now. So. The slides are online if you want to grab them. And if you have any questions about other security things, that's fine as well. I'll try to answer it.
Should we? Are there any questions that you want to address now, perhaps, or shall we do it with a drink in our hands?
Drink.
Okay, so let's get a 15-minute break then, and after that we'll be back with Marco's security quiz.